All right, well, welcome back to the West Georgia Gridiron Podcast. We have a special edition for this show. We've been talking about this for a couple weeks now. I want to welcome our new friend, Vlad. Now, Vlad, help me with your last name.
Valasuk.
Valasuk.
That's
Man,
it.
I wasn't even
Yep.
close. But hey, so you're tuning in from Alabama. You decided
That's
that you're
right.
going to come on and be in the show. We thought this would be a good idea. We want to preview the upcoming Carrollton Trojans versus the Thundering Herd from Parker High School in Birmingham, 6A champs from last year in Alabama. We went there last year. They're here with us at Carrollton this Friday night, September 19th. If you are tuning in, you don't have anything to do, any games to go to, you've got a team that's in bye week, make sure you come and get a seat early. Get on the GoFans app and get a ticket for this one early. But Vlad, I appreciate you being with us, brother.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. I love the work that you guys have been doing. You know, we need a lot of this in high school football. Just covering, just giving credit to these players, giving exposure to these players. And, I really appreciate what you guys do. And I'm happy to come on and preview this game.
That's awesome. Yeah, my son Mason, as you know, is always the host for this show, and so he's the one that makes it happen. You're the founder and, of course, the creator of Bama Prep. So they're in Alabama. You've been working in high school football for the last 3.5 years. You have a personal experience of being a player for the Thompson Warriors in Alabama, 7A. And you can tell us about that experience as a player, but then now as a play caller and the sports reporter, journalist, and kind of tell us about what's going on. How did you come to put together Bama Preps?
Yeah, so it started actually at the tail end of my senior year of high school. I was actually still playing football. I played from 2019 to 2023. It was a lot of fun while I was doing it, but I also knew, slow, fat, and white, it doesn't really mix. So, it turned into, very little college offers, and I had to go do something else and, figure out. And I thought, I already covered with Warrior Nation football, which is the Instagram page that we did for the Thompson High School. And I started that my freshman year. And I said, I think I can do this at a state level. And that's what it turned into, Bama Preps, going out, picking a name and everything. And we've been able to grow it to over 26,000 followers, over 7 million impressions a month. We're just looking for opportunities to grow. I remember, think my most notorious game would have been that I played in was the 2020 state championship game versus Auburn High School. We went down by 9 points with 30 seconds left, blocked a punt, scored a touchdown, kicked an onside, kicked a field goal to win the game. And probably the worst loss I've been a part of was actually to a Georgia school. We went and played Buford my senior year.
Oh.
And I mean, we got done
we
in.
got people throwing stuff at the screen already, man, because of that name. It's an arch nemesis right here.
It's not a good name around here, is
Our
it?
kryptonite.
That's right.
That's
Yeah,
probably why they're green.
they were ours.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were our kryptonite too. But yeah, no, with Bama Preps, we're just looking to bring exposure to all these student athletes, to these schools, to these teams. It's much more than just high school football. It's community, it's player performance. It's a chance at a free education. We try and, boast these schools as much as we can. We encourage every school to have a social media, have a platform where these recruiters can find you, where these players can go and get exposed, to the college scene. With name, image, and likeness right now, it's so easy for, even a D2 or a D3 school to go out, into the portal and get a senior who's got 2 kids and has played for 4 years. And, instead of being able to recruit a high school kid from the state of Alabama that's looking for an opportunity. So that's what we're trying to achieve, and just giving exposure to all these players. And, that's been our mission from the jump.
I love it. Well, man, I want to give you plenty of time with Mason, and y'all just y'all talk shop and preview these games. Y'all the ones with the knowledge and the passion for this game. And so, as we always say here, usually at the end of the show, there's nothing like Football Fridays in West Georgia. And I believe that's really true. Now, look, South Georgia, Middle Georgia may have something to say about that. Buford definitely does. But I love your knowledge and your passion for the game and for these high school students. And again, being a former player, man, I see why. But tell me, Mason, chime in on this. We were talking recently about, how do you even rate these players, these rankings with 5-star, 3-star? We've got some that are just upside down, and I don't even know how they're doing it. So, Mason, chime in, kind of share with some of your knowledge of what we were talking about that. And talk about specifically the players on Carrollton team and maybe what you know about, and vice versa, what you know about each other's teams. But what is this conversation like in Alabama? Are you seeing the same thing where like how are they even like this player should be y'all should be getting him a star already,
Oh
or
yeah,
and
yeah,
they're
no
not,
doubt.
or no, that's they've got that one wrong altogether. Either because it's not enough stars or it's too many stars. We've already talked about NIL a little bit, but
Mhm.
um, what do you think about that? And I'll give you the floor first, and then Mason, you chime in.
Yeah, I'm sure we have similar problems from Georgia to Alabama when it comes to player rankings. Our head coach, Coach Freeman, said it's usually a guy at 3 a.m. eating potato chips on his couch rating these kids, and it's it's whoever ends up going to these camps. Whether I'm not going to name names or anything, but it's just whoever goes to these camps and signs up and pays the money to get ranked. I think a lot of it is just, based on size. So much of what college recruiting is, you have to meet a certain height requirement, a certain weight requirement, a certain wingspan requirement, especially when it comes to these big schools. And I think players get rated likewise. I think a lot of it is just, rating off of size. And hey, if you've got some speed to come with it, that's great. Maybe your pass rush skill set, if we're talking about an edge rusher, isn't completely filled out, but you have the frame to play SEC ball or to play Big Ten or ACC ball. And I think that's a lot of what high school recruiting is, and that I think that's what a lot of the rankings are. And if you want the stars, then go to the camps and get yourself exposure. I'm certainly not saying anything against that, but I do think it's a flawed system, and I'm sure you guys have the same problems in Georgia.
Mason, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I've always I'm a believer of it is somewhat of an accurate. I think it's a good indication of kind of where that player might be at.
Hmm.
But at the same time, you got kids, and we've played in the past that are rated 4 or 5 stars, and they go out there and they're really not a factor in the game. And it's especially when when you're in my position and I'm having to each week go out and look at stats and see who's gonna be the difference maker in these games, who's gonna be a guy that they're gonna have to shut down. A lot of the times, you know, it's not these 3 stars, it's not these 4 stars, and it's I can say the only 5 star that we've ever played that I truly felt like made really kind of a difference in the game. I would say Naeem Offer was probably one of them, and
Yep.
then obviously Tyler Atkinson in the state championship game last year. And I'd probably say Caleb Downs when he was at Mill Creek as well. That he was all over the place. But other than that, I mean, we've played so many guys that they have stars, and sometimes they obviously are a huge part of that team's game, but a lot of the time they're not. And we have players on our team just like everybody else who should be ranked, and they're not. And but I think the good thing is it's not the end all be all. When you got there, your stars are not what's winning you the game. It's what can they do? What can each individual guy and each team, what can they do to win the game? And so whether you have four, we saw Gainesville, and I'm not trying to, say anything bad about them because they're a really good team, but they have a bunch of 3 stars, a bunch of 4 stars. They have 1 5 star, and they did not win. So stars aren't everything. I mean, if you were to put on paper more, Carrollton versus Gainesville recruits based on 3 stars and 4 stars, they have more than we do, but they did not win the game. And I'm again not trying to bash Gainesville or anybody else, but it's not the end all be all. I do think it can be a good indicator of where a player might be at, but I think offers are somewhat of a better way to kind of see where they're at. But even then, there are like you said, size matters. I think a lot of the time, especially at Carrollton, we have guys that are not necessarily the biggest, especially on the offensive and defensive lines. Obviously, this year is kind of an exception, but in years past, we've had guys that they can get the job done, but they're only 5'11" on the offensive line. And when you're going to play at a D1 school, they're not looking for anyone really under, I would probably say, at least 6'1".
Yep.
Depending on what position you play. If you play tackle, obviously they're looking for anywhere from 6'4" plus. But I think it is all about size. And like you said, it is about going to camps. I do think it can be an indicator, but again, I think when you put on the tape and when you look at the stats, whatever that says is a much better indicator, and that's what I trust more than anything.
Yeah, no
Would you
doubt.
both agree that maybe marketability has
Yeah,
something to
of
do with
course.
that too? It's your marketing skills or somebody that you're
Mhm.
able to market for you. Of course, highlight reels. I mean, all kinds of things go into play. But and I'll throw this out: my cousin and Mason's cousin, Will Campbell, was the #1 recruit out of the state of Louisiana, where I'm from, and of course went 4th overall for the NFL to the Patriots. Go Will! And but I don't know that he really marketed himself that well. Sometimes talent just gives you that, right? You get recognition by what your performance is. But I don't know that he had some highlights, but I wouldn't say it was the best. But yeah, these 7-on-7s, and it's like there's some people that will have advantages and then those that won't, and for whatever reason. But man, when they get on the field, you can't deny. Mason pointed out, look, hey, don't sleep on Bo Ball on Carrollton. He's a no star right now, but making it happen. So any other comments on that, Vlad?
Yeah, no, I can't help but agree. I think marketability, you look at, what you guys had in your own school with Julian Lewis over the past few seasons. And, I don't think name, image, and likeness has had as big of effect in high school it has in college. Obviously, you guys have a different perspective. We don't have that in
Right.
Alabama. The thing with Alabama, everybody says they're always going to be 5 years behind everything. And, that rings true with name, image, and likeness as well, to where they would much rather make committees and subcommittees of the subcommittees to figure out if this is something they want to implement instead of actually implementing it. And that's obviously the fault of the state to not allow these top players to make generational wealth at an early age. But that, I mean, that's really besides the point. And once you get to college, the opportunities are endless. You can make $50,000, $100,000 a year, and if you come into that as a higher rated prospect, your chances only multiply. And what you said about being 6'1" as the baseline, that's the baseline for maybe the center. But the
Yeah.
rest of the offensive line, you're looking for big dudes, and you will end up having to play either FCS ball or D2 or D3 ball if you're anything under that, and it really is a struggle. And that's really where the cream of the crop rises. And you want to talk about marketing yourself as a 5-star athlete, try doing it as a, I don't know, let's say 5'10", 270-pound center. It
Right.
just gets even tougher.
Did Nick Saban have a lot to do with why they don't have NIL at the high school level?
I wouldn't say it's a collegiate issue. I just say it's old habits die hard in this state. It's the deep South for a reason, and a lot of mindsets don't change. And that's the case with NIL, just as it is with a lot of other issues. And I just don't think people. I think people get scared off when they see what's happened in Georgia with the quote unquote player movement and the transfers becoming such an issue, or at least an issue in the public. And I think that scares a lot of the member schools off from certifying anything related to NIL. I think they're worried about player movement, for better opportunity, or under the table payments, whatever it might be. I don't think that anybody's really there yet.
All right. Have you had any conversations with Frank Warren about this, coach of Parker High School? I mean, any of these coaches? I mean, have you been able to get their feedback on it?
Yeah, I think the general consensus in Alabama is it's going to happen, and I think pretty much everybody has accepted that NIL is coming at some point, whether it's a year from now, 2 or 3 years from now, whatever it may be. But they want it done correctly, and whatever correctly looks like, I don't know, and I don't think anybody else knows, because it is such a new idea, it is such a new concept, even for the college ranks, and then you put it in high school. Are you able to use the school's branding in your name, image, and likeness? Are you able to go to a car dealership and say, I play for this and this school? In those advertisements, can you use, the high school's likeness? I'm sure the high school would like that, being on there as well. But that also brings up the question of, if I move here, do I have deals over here at a different school, maybe a bigger school? And this is where the transfer issue comes back into play, to where, we really don't know what any of this would look like. And you can look to Georgia or Florida or California for guidance on this kind of stuff, but it's a limited scope, just because of the differences in athletic associations, the difference in legislature, how it's written, and just the differences in states overall.
Would you guys agree that they probably have their hands full with recruiting rules
Yeah.
before any of that gets figured out. All right, well, let's get into it. These guys that are listening in, ladies that are listening in, moms, grandparents, everybody that's listening, players, they're going, hey, we're here to talk about Parker football against Carrollton
That's
this
right.
Friday night, September 19th. So, Vlad, what do you see in this Parker team? 6A champs last year. We went there. We beat them. We lost our state championship. There may be a comparison of some would say between Georgia football and the caliber of Alabama football, vice versa. We're not talking about college levels. We're talking about high school levels. But where do you see this happening, or what is happening on Friday night between these two teams compared to last year? And if you want to give some background on last year, that'd be good too.
Yeah, sure. Well, let me open with this for the matchup preview. I think there is a distinct difference between the upper classifications of Georgia high school football and Alabama high school football.
Okay.
You know, the population density in Georgia is crazy, and with that comes more kids, that comes more high school students, that comes a larger talent pool. And per capita, Georgia puts out some of the most NFL players that you'll see. Per population, and so does Alabama, but to a smaller scale. But that that gives you guys some really good football teams. And I think Carrollton's one of them. You look at last season, what you guys had on both sides of the football, obviously headlined by Julian Lewis, but, just a real crop of talent at receiver, at running back, 5-star defensive back that you guys had last season. And I think that does make a distinct difference. If you take every year the top team from Georgia and the top team from Alabama, there's going to be a little deficit there in talent for the team from Alabama. Unless it's you catch Georgia on a bad year and Alabama on a really good year. But, as far as this matchup went last season, Parker was without their starting quarterback, Dylan Reese. They had to put 4-star safety commit Timothy Merritt at quarterback and ran much more of a wildcat offense. They fed their backs, Terrence Gaines and Chancellor Sparks, and they would use Naeem Offord in the wildcat game a little bit, the Oregon defensive back now. And, I think it will be a different story offensively for Parker this year. Dylan Reese comes back. He's third in the state in passing, over 1,000 yards through his first 4 games. And Kentrell Davis at wide receiver. I can look through some of the stats here. They've got, really 3 to 4 guys receiver wise that can go out and get the football. I believe Dorian Barney has graduated. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
He's a senior this year.
He's a senior this year.
Thank
Okay,
God
so
he is not.
yeah, I was fixing to say. So you guys still, even if you didn't have Barney, I knew you guys would have such a great defensive back room from watching that Gainesville game in prep earlier this week. But you look at Kawan Gregg, Jacoby Quates, and Georgia Tech commit Kentrell Davis. I think that Parker has a really good chance to get some gains through the air, and Dylan Reese has matured as a quarterback, and I think he's done a much better job with a 75% completion percentage this year. He's led Parker to be 4-0. And let me say this, Parker may have won the state championship last year, but after losing Merritt, after losing Jordan Crawford, the defensive lineman at Auburn now, and losing Naeem Offord, there was a lot of talk about this maybe being a quote-unquote 2020 LSU type of team where you had, this great super team that won the national championship, and then, the next year they come out, they've lost 21 out of 22 starters. And just struggled throughout the season. And
Did
Parker
Mason put you up to that by chance? Because knowing that I'm an LSU fan,
that
see all
I didn't
this
know. I didn't know you were an LSU fan,
and I'm like, man. But
Look,
you're right. You're absolutely right.
I'm 0 for 2 right now. I've already said Buford, and now I brought this one up. So,
yeah, we got people down in Louisiana throwing crawfish at us now.
Oh man, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I agree with you though.
Yeah, and there was, some whispers, but I never thought it would get to that point just because of what was returning, and that's who I'll bring up right now. Robert Taylor, one of the leading edge rushers for this Herd team, Vodney Cleveland, the 5-star Texas commit defensive tackle, 3-star defensive back Johnny Moody in the secondary. This is still a rock solid Parker defense, in my opinion. Top 3 in the state overall between all classifications, without a doubt the best in Class 6A. Not much of a debate there. I think Carrollton's going to see the best of Parker. I really do. And the big question for me is just, what does Dylan Reese look like in a big game? I think they can't rely on the running game as much, or at least the high-end skill in the backfield that they had last year, having the luxury of a Timothy Merritt or a Naeem Offord that can play both sides. You don't have that anymore at all. And I think if Parker can get going offensively in this game, I think their defense can do enough. And I'm sure I'll learn about some super mutants on that Carrollton team that are just excellent ball players. But from what I've seen Alabama wise, Parker's right back to where they were last season.
Ooh, all right, Mason, what do you got for Carrollton?
Well, I have to agree with his assessment. I mean, I do think this team is in some aspects a lot different than last year, but in the same way, a lot of the same. For Carrollton, I think it was almost kind of a same story. You go to the state championship for the second time in 3 years. It was tied at halftime, 17-17. You lose to Grayson, who's, as of right now, is one of the best in the entire nation. I know they played Thompson earlier this season, and that one, even though Grayson didn't have their starting quarterback, somehow pulled it off, I believe, by 1 point in overtime.
Yes.
So, I mean, Grayson's kind of I don't want to write Buford off, but Grayson's kind of the new Buford especially if they win it again. But Carrollton, I think, especially with Juju not being at Carrollton anymore, a lot of attention has been kind of pulled away from them, and that's not to say that they still haven't gotten a lot of attention. Obviously, they were just on max preps, but even when you go to when we went to the scrimmage, I know it's a scrimmage, but it didn't feel like it did last year. Like, it doesn't, like, the environment didn't feel as populated as it did last year. And I think a lot of attention has been brought off of the team because there's, not a quarterback who's that marketable. I do think there are people on our team. I think there's people on every team that you could market, and there's a story there, especially with our running back Cam Wood. I mean, that's a story in and of itself.
Yeah,
but
no
I do
doubt.
think that a lot of people kind of aren't paying attention to Carrollton and Georgia, at least this year for 6A. There's a lot of talk about Douglas County, who's in our region. A lot of people think that they're going to probably beat us this year, and we'll get there when we get there. But when you're competing against Douglas County, Buford, Grayson, etc., it's pretty difficult in Georgia to really get some traction and attention. And obviously, last year we had a 5-star quarterback who helped us do that. But this year, I think it is kind of almost the same situation as last year. I think, obviously, through 5 games, I think our defense is not doing as well as we were last year. I mean, I'm still only giving up 14 points a game through 5 games. But it's pretty similar to last year. I'll say that. Obviously, each game has gone differently. Woodward Academy, first game of the season last year, was close. It wasn't close this year, but Rome was not close last year, and it was close this year, and that was a huge rivalry game. But there's a lot of speculation going into this Gainesville game of whether Carrollton was going to be able to perform on the road against a top 3 team in 5A in Gainesville, and obviously Carrollton ended up beating them by 3 possessions, but they were only up by 1 point heading into the fourth quarter. So again, I think Carrollton's they're not without their flaws. Obviously, they're not the number 1 team in 6A like they were last year when they faced Parker. They're not the number 1 team in the state. So they got a little bit of a different dynamic, but we got a lot of guys who've come back, who've returned. You got 4-star wide receiver. He also kind of plays some safety. Georgia commit Ryan Mosley. Obviously, you got Peyton Zachary, who's a wide receiver committed to UNLV, 3-star. He also does a lot in the return game, more on punts than anything. You got, Zakai Helton on the offensive line, also plays defensive line. He's going to Georgia. And, the list goes on and on. I can name probably a couple more names. But I think for Carrollton, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how they adapt to, because obviously you said Dylan Reese is back, obviously a top 3 passer in the state of Alabama. And when in 4 games, if you're throwing for over 1,000 yards in 4 games, I mean, that's incredible. And I believe he also has 14 touchdowns as well.
Yes.
And if at all, he has probably 1 interception. If at that, he might not have any. But I think for Carrollton, seeing how they're going to do against the pass is definitely going to be interesting, because I think that's the weakest part of Carrollton's defense. I think their run defense is, right back where it was last year. Last year when they played Buford on the road, I don't even think Buford was averaging 5 yards per carry, and they had 3 guys who were all D1 caliber guys who were recruited and ranked, whatever. Obviously, only one of them is returned for Buford, but they were only holding them to 5 carries a game. Obviously, it wasn't the same situation in the state championship game. They were averaging a lot more. But I do think it's going to be interesting if Carrollton can shut down the running game, or kind of have it as stagnant as it's been against other teams. I wonder how Carrollton's defensive, secondary can do against Parker, and I think that's really going to be where the game's decided. I also think penalties are going to be a lot part of this game. Carrollton's a very flawed team. They commit penalties left and right. Last week against Gainesville, we had a 1 touchdown that got called back because of holding. Just mistake after mistake, unnecessary roughness, unsportsmanlike conduct, you name it, we probably done it. False start, whatever. But penalties are definitely going to be one thing we're going to have to hone in on. Obviously, stopping, the air attack, because like you mentioned, obviously Kewan Gregg, Jacoby Quates, Kentrell Davis. I mean, Kentrell Davis going to Georgia Tech. He's I believe I have here he's 6'3", 190. I mean,
He's huge. Yeah, he's
huge. That's a tall receiver, and we don't really have, tall defensive backs. Now we have some guys who are, I think, quick, but I think the tallest defensive back we have is Dorian Barney. He's only 6'1". So everyone else is under 6'1", which at defensive back is not really that big of a deal. But when you're going up against a guy who's 6'3", I mean, we saw it in the Rome game. They had 2 6'3" wide receivers, and they just kind of really did whatever they wanted to against us. But offensively, I think it's going to be interesting to see how Parker's defense does against our run. Obviously, Cam Wood just ran for 4 rushing touchdowns and way over 100 yards. And the sad thing is that he's really the only back we have. So after that, we have a freshman and a junior. The junior really doesn't have any big game experience, and the freshman obviously doesn't either. So if you shut down Cam Wood in the running game, because we have Mason Holtzclaw, one of the quarterbacks, who's kind of a runner, but we haven't really seen him be like a true dual threat who's like can attack you on the ground. He just does enough to get the first down and extend the chains, but defensively, can they stop the run? And if so, then how does their secondary look against our pass? Because when you got Ryan Mosley, Rontre Welch, Peyton Zachary, and et cetera at wide receiver, it becomes a whole nother ball game. But I like C.J. Cypher, our freshman quarterback. He's supposed to be a sophomore this year, but he obviously reclassed down, which is another big thing in Georgia. A lot of reclassifying has been going on recently. Obviously, Juju was supposed to be a senior this year. But C.J. Cypher, he's a freshman. He's already, with sharing reps with another quarterback, already has 800 passing yards. So he's been incredible. Obviously, his first turnover of the year was this past week. He threw a terrible pick 6 against Gainesville. But really, they've been flawless passing the ball and looked really great. So I wonder, really just in all phases of the game, how it's going to turn out. But another thing I'll point out is special teams. Carrollton last year, I know they had a blocked punt that was returned for a touchdown, and I believe they also had a blocked field goal. But I think Carrollton does have an advantage in special teams, especially in the return game. We've seen a lot of great returns this season, and not necessarily they've all gone for touchdowns, but Peyton Zachary and Rontre Welch, those 2 guys alone are very dangerous, I think, in the return game. Obviously, our kicker, Julian Vargas, has been 32 touchbacks on 37 kickoffs. Wow. So when you got a guy like that who's not letting you return the ball, and he's not giving you opportunities in the special teams, and we've only punted 6 times this whole season. So I think in the special teams we definitely have an advantage, but will Parker be in a situation where they're going to have to be punting is the question. I think that if they're not in a situation where they're punting all the time, it's not really going to matter, because Dylan Reese, I definitely am a little intimidated by him, because I'm not sure if he's a dual threat necessarily, but definitely throwing that ball, he's really dangerous. And obviously, like you said, we didn't play him last year. We played Timothy Merritt, who was a safety, and they just really didn't throw the ball much at all last year. So I think it's going to be interesting, but I think it's going to be, again, I think no matter the result of this game, each of these teams is definitely going to walk away better than when they came into the game. And obviously last year, Parker, we were their only loss. I mean, after that, they ended up winning every single rest of their game and winning the 6A state championship. Obviously for us, we didn't lose a single game till the state championship. So I think it's going to be very similar to last year and how these seasons are going for these teams. But I think this is just 2 behemoths going at it, 2 top 3 teams in their states respectively going at it in Grisham Stadium. And Parker, I don't know how they do on the road. I don't know, what their environment normally is like in terms of stadium. But, Carroll, I'm trying not to be biased, but Grisham Stadium, I will say, is a different type of environment. Obviously, it's not.
That's what I've heard. That's what I've heard.
It's definitely definitely not your average high school football stadium. I'll say that. So how will they do on the road is interesting. But I think this is going to be a really good game. But yeah, I think it's going to really come all down to penalties and then whose defense can really just be better. Because I think each of these offenses are going to do well, but whose defense can make enough stops or whose defense can make more stops than the other, I think that'll be the deciding factor, to be honest with you.
And Vlad,
Absolutely.
got a couple of things to ask you about that. So, how do they travel? I don't remember exactly how. I was not at that game. It was on ESPN, but how well will the fans travel from Birmingham to Carrollton?
Don't expect much, I'd say. I think when it's at home, I think Parker does a good job of packing out that stadium, especially when they're good, and they've been good. I'm sure we'll see some parents come to the game, but I don't think it'll be a city of Birmingham affair as it is for most AH Parker home games. But I've heard, I mean, I've talked to a few people. My good friend Drew of GAHS football on Instagram, and he tells me, he goes, man, there ain't another atmosphere like Carrollton. And he said it's like a black hole when you come there and play. So,
Well, and have they
we'll have to
played?
see if they're up for it.
Yes, sir. Have they played any teams, or will they play any teams that have a dual quarterback system like Carrollton?
I'm looking now, unless I don't anticipate it, because right after this they're gonna have to go play 7A Hoover High School. Their starting quarterback
Right.
has been pretty set in stone, and that goes for pretty much everybody else. And as far as I know, you mentioned CJ Cipher, and I would assume the other quarterback to be more of your dual threat sort of. You get him out and you run him a
Situational
little
guy.
bit. Yep. Yeah. No, I don't think they'll see that. I don't think they'll see that the rest of the year. I don't know how much they've seen it to begin with.
Yeah, something to prepare for sure. I think that is something kind of unique. But again, and I know Coach Frank Warren mentioned in a recent interview that they have a total of 4 receivers that he feels at any time can
Mhm.
bust out a play. So that can be a challenge for us, I believe. And so
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. But well, gentlemen, I think that's good. Any other keys to success? Anything else you think you want to share about this game? And again, Vlad, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with our fans. And they're passionate here. I know they're
Yeah.
passionate there, so
Yeah.
it should be a good one. Now, I think what's different than last year's, we don't have the big fanfare of ESPN and all this
Mhm.
going on that I know of. That's going to be covering this game. I think that for both quarterbacks and for both coaches and coaching staffs, that may be actually something that Desire is not having all that,
Oh, no
where the
doubt.
players just show up and they're, and I will say this, I had this conversation with one of guys that we both know in Alabama with Brant Berry, is that,
Yep.
they are playing together as a team. They're playing for each other. They both had Carrollton and with Parker had high profile, I guess, players that were in the limelight last year, nationally known. And so they don't have those. They're not playing for them to help them have a good season for their last seasons. They're playing for each other. Do you agree with
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to, the ESPN games or the nationally, regionally televised, whatever it may be, the circus only really comes to town once or twice every few years.
Right.
So, I think it's important to put that aside when you do play those games. But I still think, even though an ESPN's not there, the trip that they're going to have to make over to Carrollton, the long bus ride. Like we had a team in Alabama, central of Phoenix City. They traveled all the way to Orlando on a bus to go down there and play the First Academy. And then they bust all the way back after beating them that night. So I hope Parker doesn't have that sort of trip. I remember for the Buford game my senior year, we rode down there the night before and we stayed in a hotel, and well, it didn't help us much. Justice Haynes had something else to say about that, but I think it's important not to let the spectacle of, the big cross state game, hamper them. And I think ESPN not being here is definitely a help for that. You just get to go out and you get to play a football game. You don't have to worry about TV timeouts, hopefully not as much
Yeah.
anymore. I know in Alabama they'll do a heat timeout each half, but the game should definitely go a little bit quicker.
Yeah, it's something about killing that momentum, isn't it? Just when
Yeah,
you've got to
no
stop for
doubt.
TV timeouts, heat, we understand. Well, man, we've said it was a special edition. I hope for the fans it has been special. I believe it has been. But I look forward to some of these. We'll do this again next year. And if we can find some other ways to collaborate, we'll certainly do that. And then look, if you're wanting to learn more about Bama Preps, make sure you're giving them some love and then share this episode with everybody you know on your social media outlets, wherever you're at. And then this will be on YouTube as well as a video version of it if you like watching it. So make sure that you're liking and rating it and commenting. So that'll help other people find this as well. And then if you want to be in contact with Vlad, so maybe you want to invite him to be a part of something you're doing. So or just learn from it, and definitely follow him. We'll put all his contact in the show notes for today. Well, Vlad, we always say it is nothing like Football Fridays in West Georgia. I hope that they proved that is true again, but we'll see. But until next time, my friend, be blessed.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
All right. Till next time, guys.